English translation. 218th contact. Saturday, 30th May, 1987. VOZO 2 hours.
Nice that you have come, my friend, because I have a great need to leave the Earthball somewhat. Somehow, everything here depresses me, and I feel that the world is crushing me, and that I am completely robbed of my freedom. If I may ask you, take me into your ship and zoom with me for 2 or 3 hours, somewhat out into free space, where I can see the stars and the galaxies in the expanse of the universe. That will certainly help me and bring inner peace, the feeling of freedom, quiet and calm back to me again.
As a matter of fact, your appearance terrifies me. But I also know why you are so downcast and are so very depressed, because I watched everything as you were so viciously tormented and insulted by your wife. On one hand, to me, it is all completely incomprehensible and strange how your wife carries on and revolts against you in such a manner, insults and torments you, and on the other hand, I would never have thought that she could be so scurrilous and os-ardent, has gotten very badly out of control of her good human nature. But actually, I have never looked deeper into this matter, nor have any of us, because we do not want to violate your private sphere. But today this happened unexpectedly and inadvertently, because I wanted to seek you out on a private basis, and because of that, I paused over the center's house in order to see if you are well enough to have a conversation with me in regard to a certain matter. Now, after everything that I have seen and heard, I must completely revise my opinion in regard to your wife, which indeed all those others of us must also do who I self-evidently must orientate about the truth and reality. For my part, I still want to make the comment about this, that your wife has carried on like the Fury, the mythological, raving, furious, and terror-disseminating Roman goddess of vengeance, and that is absolutely unworthy of a female of humankind. And, with her, that it actually concerns a core group member, makes everything still very much worse, more incomprehensible, and more unworthy. Moreover, she herself, in particular, should already have long since been taught something better, and should have learnt much, since she indeed stands directly at the source of the teaching and the knowledge, and she knows about the actual contacts with us. Moreover, in this regard, she herself has been permitted to witness many events, and so forth. Consequently, she should long ago have turned to a better, more reasonable, and more human wise of behavior. Naturally, we knew, and indeed already many years before the contacts were taken up with you in the 40s, that she, in view of her upbringing, her demeanor and thinking, as well as in regard to her behavior, and so forth, would bring you much tribulation, suffering, and pain, because that would be required for your development and the unfolding of your energy for the fulfillment of your mission. Yet we actually did not know that everything would be so very bad, as I now myself, as a silent observer, had to witness. For my part, I do not understand how you cope with all that and have never complained, and that you continue to stay with your wife, and you do not part from her. You would have really had every ground for that, with a clear conscience and with justification.
You are a very dear friend to me, Quetzal. You know many things about me, yet you also do not know many things about me, as is precisely now also the case with the relationship about which you have spoken. On one hand, I always give every human being another chance to change to the better, to make something good again, or to correct a mistake, until that also actually then has happened, or until I finally must acknowledge that every chance will be senselessly, scornfully, malevolently, wantonly, or uncomprehendingly wasted. But many months or many years and even decades can pass until this point in time, and I only give up if I can see no more hope and no more possibility that a goal would indeed still be obtainable. But I have never yet reached such a state of giving up, because in this regard my patience is very extensive.
We all know that. And your patience, in association with your endurance, is indeed also the decisive factor through which you are able to carry out your mission.
That may be, yet I still actually wanted to say something more. See, in regards to my wife, I affirmed that I will stand by her in good as well as bad times. That may be only an unconsidered and empty phrase for many human beings in the case of their marriage or other occasions. Not, however, for me, because I actually contemplated these words and this promise very precisely before it had progressed such that I could stand by them with a clear conscience. My thoughts in this regard already began with Svath, and it was consequently already clear to me as a boy what these words and this promise actually signify in their sense, and what value they have hidden within them. Therefore the recognition as well as the conviction and the decision matured in me that, during my entire life, come what may, I would never break my word or promise. What is more, I am able to still remember that this resolution arose in me sometime in the month of April or May after my 7th birthday. Anyway, the dandelions, the lady's smock, as well as many other flowers, were blooming in the meadows. Everything was also blooming in the gardens. Also, the hawthorn bushes and various bushes of all kinds were in glorious full bloom, as well as the cherry trees, pear trees, and apple trees. The sun shone splendidly warm from a cloudless azure blue sky, and a fabulous twittering of birds was all around. Therefore, I then reached the decision that I will never break my word or promise. And I also hold to that in relation to my wife as well as in relation to every other human being. That will also remain that way, and indeed even if everything gets even worse with my cannibal. I can, in regard to her, as well as in regard to every other human, only then step back from my word, and promise if she herself breaks her word, and promise and goes her own way without me. On my part, I can therefore never break a word or promise that I have given, nor indeed if there are bad consequences for me.
I did not know that, my friend, yet I find that you should at least defend yourself. It could actually have come out very badly since your wife had, with great strength, flung the knives and forks in your face over the kitchen table. You could have been killed by the kilogram weight of the crystal ashtray which she hurled right across the whole kitchen, at your head. I will heal your wounds and swelling when we are in my flying device. But then let us now go. Later, when you feel better again, we can catch up on that about which I wanted to talk to you. First, I want to now fulfill your long-held wish for you.
Thank you for your caring. I can well use it, because my skull thunders and rumbles with 1,000 imps. But which wish do you mean? Because I have several of them that surely will, however, never be fulfilled.
I can feel for you regarding your headache, but you will soon be free of it. I am thinking in regard to your wish, being that you would like to plunge into the deep sea and observe the deep sea animals.
We can do that today?
That is of correctness. Let us go now.
Is that possible then with your beam ship? And where will we dive into the deep sea?
All of our flying devices are suited for diving processes whereby, due to our pressure protection screens, there are no limits set for the depth. We will dive into the depths of the Atlantic as well as the Pacific.
So, I am ready. On arrival in Quetzal's beam ship, he treats the various scratches as well as the wounds and the swelling on my head. Within minutes everything is healed, and also the buzzing and the hammering in my skull, as well as the headaches, are gone. Then we zoom out into the world's free space, where we spend around 50 minutes, whereby I feel better and better and freer, and I can also rid myself of my depression. Meanwhile, practically nothing is said, because I am occupied with my thoughts which Quetzal quite obviously does not want to interrupt. Then Quetzal flies his beam ship back to Earth and over the Atlantic, to then descend into the depths of the sea. Then we hover over the spongy sea bottom, and Quetzal moves the beam ship, which indeed has now become a diving ship, slowly along. The beam ship glows externally in radiating brilliance, and lights up the pitch-black darkness in a broad circumference. Not much is said thereby, because I devote my entire attention to everything I can see during 1 full hour in the deep sea. Thereafter, this also applies for the deep sea dive in the Pacific, which, however, only lasts 25 minutes. In regard to the living things, there is not exactly much to see in the deepest depths, because creatures appear only in isolation, in small form, whereby for me, however, they are exotic, as are also those in the higher areas of the water. Many of these living things are self-luminous, in greenish or whitish light. I can only observe bigger life forms extremely sporadically, each and every one of which is of a strange form, those seen by me, at any rate. Still more seldom, gigantic animals emerge out of the darkness of the deep sea, as, for example, whitish and reddish as well as brownish giant squid and dark gray or black snake-shaped creatures, which I estimate to be 15 to 20 meters long and 4 to 5 meters in diameter. Also, in 3 different locations, 3 single gigantic forms of life emerge, which I initially designate as deep sea whales. However, Quetzal will instruct me that it deals with so-called sleeping sharks, the existence of which is not yet known to terrestrial humans. The smallest of the 3 I estimate to be some 10 meters long, while the 2 others are some 2 to 3 meters longer. But there are, among many other very interesting things, also the black things, chimneys, also known as black smokers, of which Quetzal had once spoken, and he said that they are the essential origin of the later forms of life on the earth, in water, air, and land, along with inclusions from outer space through comets, meteors, and asteroids. In these black things, chimneys from which pitch-black swaths, which are impregnated with sulfur and various materials, rise up, emerged early branches of bacteria which, as they rose out of the chimneys, were released and began the evolutionary work of life. But that, says Quetzal, is all still unknown to the terrestrial scientists. What is still interesting with this observation of the black things' chimneys is the fact that in their nearer and further surroundings, swarms of enormous numbers of large and snow-white creatures, which I simply designate as giant or oversized scampi, also known as shrimp prawns, bustle about on the sulfurous rocks or on the other steep rocks. Leaving the deep sea and after a few minutes back again in my office, it is precisely 3:17 A. As I look at the clock, I would like to thank you very much for everything, my friend. My son, the whole thing was an exceptionally special experience for me, for which many scientists would envy me.
It was a special honor and a joy for me to be allowed to fulfill your long-cherished wish.
I am honored by that, but you still must be sure of my gratitude. May I now ask you a few things? You know, I only go to bed around the early morning, and thus, if you still have time.
For the next 4 days, I have my free time. Therefore, you may heedlessly take 1 or 2 hours from me, and thus, you can raise your questions.
Some time ago, you told me what you call your Play-Aran language, as well as the intercosmic language and the language of the people to whom Manara belongs. You mentioned specific names, but they have all escaped me again. Please mention them to me again.
The Play-Aran language we call Sarat. The intercosmic language we designate as Kosan, and the language of the people, to whom Manara belongs, we call Jenan or Diran language.
Exactly. Those were the names of the languages. Thank you. Before the end of the 70s, there was talk, with you, Simya, Se, and Ta, about the fact that in almost 1,000 years, a great danger from space will threaten the Earth. If I remember everything correctly, you spoke of a large meteor or asteroid or of a comet. Yet also in this respect, I am no longer familiar with everything, which is why I would be grateful to you if you could give me some details about this danger again. Afterward, I was asked about this by several people, because some years ago, I gave answers to questions which you had explained to me. Now, in relation to this, questions have even arisen recently. At that time, there was also talk of the fact that also in about 1,000 years, the magnetic pole of the Earth would be shifted southward from the north in such a manner that it would then be located in the area of Mecca in Saudi Arabia.
That is correct. The magnetic North Pole, and with it, of course, also the South Pole, is shifting from the north to the south in the direction specified by you. And the magnetic North Pole must already be searched for in the area of Greenland. This is due to the Earth's internal shifts and displacements of the most diverse inner planetary layers, as well as powerful variations in the Earth's innermost hot liquid mass, through which the actual geomagnetism is produced.
The inner planetary layers, this belongs to the field of the geologists who deal with earthly tectonics, that is to say with geotectonics, right? This is a branch of science of geology, which deals with the construction of the Earth's crust, the storage conditions of the rock strata and other layers of the Earth, their variations over the course of time of geologic history, as well as with the causes that trigger such storage variations, if I still correctly remember what I learned in school.
Your memory is as good as ever. Your statement corresponds to the truth. But concerning your first question, our talk was about an asteroid. If the conditions relating to the orbit of the asteroid change, then in nearly 1,000 years, more exactly said, in exactly 893 years, in mid-March of the year 2880, this could come very close to the Earth, or even endanger it through an impact or through a too close flyby. In any case, this asteroid, which was already discovered by terrestrial astronomers in 1950 and which received the designation 1950 DA, will at least come into very dangerous proximity to the Earth, namely within the orbit of the Moon, at a distance to Earth of about 260,000 to 300,000 kilometers. However, if changes in the course of the asteroid should arise, which can always be a probability due to cosmic as well as solar planetary influences, etc., then a closer, very close, or even a more distant flyby is possible, whereby even the Moon could, perhaps, enter into the path of the asteroid. The possibilities are always very many, through which the courses of meteors, comets, asteroids, wandering planets, and clouds of energy, as well as clouds of matter, etc., can be changed in their journey or in their drifting through space. However, by the year 2880, the technological capabilities developed by the Earth humans will be able to counteract the threatening catastrophe, namely in the form that the asteroid, which is a little more than 1,000 meters in diameter, can be forced away from its Earth-endangering course.
Yes, that is the information that you gave to me. But now, to something else. Over and over again, crazy ones appear, claiming that they have had contacts with you or else with some extraterrestrials, and that they would have been promised that the extraterrestrials would bring salvation to the Earth and to the Earth humans. As a rule, these crazy ones who make such assertions are some sect bosses or delusional believers and lunatics of other natures, who lie their heads off and promise their believers and followers that the extraterrestrials will come with spaceships and save all of those, or at least a part of those, who believe in the hypocritical horror stories of the bringing of salvation through extraterrestrials, and will take them to a nicer, more peaceful, and better planet in safety. The crazy ones who invent and maintain such stories, partly due to pure addiction to profit, delusional faith, confusion, or madness, try to convey to their followers who are enslaved to them and to their believers that the extraterrestrials would allegedly take their own responsibility from them and send them rescue.
that is well known to us. All evil means are right to these liars, swindlers, and deceivers, in order to bind those who are enslaved to them and their believers to themselves. But the truth is that neither we nor any other earth foreigners exercise the role of the bringers of salvation. Neither we nor others bring teachings of salvation to the earth, and, thus, to the earth humans. For any teaching of salvation is of a religious and sectarian nature, and only serves to make those who believe therein dependent and enslaved, in order to subjugate them, to exploit them, and also to cause them to remain faithful to the relevant religion or sect. In addition, each teaching of salvation is designed to drive the believers and those who are enslaved into irrational teachings and into the mistaken belief that all their offenses, wrong lifestyles and injustices, as well as the harming of fellow human beings, can receive lenient treatment and can easily be forgotten, and thus they would be forgiven by the bringers of salvation. It is in the tricked believers and the enslaved that the responsibility for anything and everything would lie in a predetermination or present determination with the extraterrestrials, or just with God the Creator, who should allegedly exist and who should determine and direct everything. Thus, the religious believers, sect believers, delusional believers, and others are forcefully kept by unfair, misguided elements, etc., through lies, swindle, and deception, from bearing and perceiving their own responsibility for anything and everything that always arises in life. The belief in salvation-bringing extraterrestrials, in any salvation-bringing teaching, or in a salvation-bringing God, who should also still be just, as well as full of love, understanding, and willingness to help, corresponds to the imagination of profit-minded human beings who, originally, had deliberately designed their created irrational teaching in order to gather believers and enslaved ones around themselves, whom they could exploit in every respect, in order to be able to lead lives of joy and glory through them. And since ancient times, there have always been enough fools who let others think for them instead of giving themselves the trouble of thinking, of reasoning, and of the pursuit of truth and the recognition of actuality and, thus, reality. For it was always easier for them to shift the responsibility for anything and everything onto others, or onto extraterrestrials, or simply onto a God creator. That is to say, a creator God, in order, then, to take the path of least resistance and the path of least effort, as well as the path of laziness. And there are still such human beings on the earth today, unfortunately still in large quantities. But if the earth human really wants to experience a salvation, then he or she must bring this to themselves, in that they laboriously acquire it themselves. But this means that they must turn to the truth and reality and must perceive their own responsibility in every respect and must bear it and fulfill it. In this meaning, it is given to be recognized that neither extraterrestrials nor a God creator, neither a teaching of salvation, a religion or sect, nor any lunatic, spinner, delusional believer, godly one, enlightened one, guru, master, or exalted one by his own grace, etc., brings any salvation. Rather, only every single person can acquire this for themselves, in reference to their own personality, their conduct and their lifestyle, their behavior, their love, their inner and outer peace, their balance and harmony, their knowledge, their wisdom and evolution, and their entire progress in consciousness-related and material form.
Man, son, that was quite a speech, and indeed, one that makes a lot of sense. I am just surprised that you use words like lunatic and spinner. That is not your style.
The designations come from your vocabulary, and I think that they give the right character to my explanation.
Ah, that is accepted and also clear. Now, once again, a question that relates to the black hole phenomenon. Our astronomical science still is not clear as to whether black holes actually exist.
About that I may not explain too much, because there is still a fairly long time needed before the astronomical scientists of Earth are in a position to understand these important things. So it will extend into the third millennium before they will be ready to gain the necessary understanding for this and to evaluate it properly. First, they still must attain many other insights through research in order to be able to understand everything bit by bit in all contexts.
But in broad terms, you could still deal with it.
Well, but I may not actually explain too much. So, in every galaxy, a black hole exists at its center. But there are still black holes that have their existence in free space, which are stationary, so to speak, while others wander through free space. As this is also the case with regard to black clouds, that is to say, dark clouds of matter, which are simply called dark clouds by the earthly scientists of astronomy. The so-called black holes actually have nothing to do with a hole, for in truth, these concern very coarse material formations of matter of enormous sizes, which originally result from giant collapsed suns, as well as partially from collapsed galaxies. Such events likewise occur over and over again, at the present time and also in the future, somewhere in the far reaches of the universal matter belt, which is erroneously regarded and designated as the actual and entire universe by the earthly scientists of astronomy, although this consists of 6 other belts, so therefore there are 7. But back to black holes. These developed, that is to say resulted, from the collapsing of suns of immense sizes as well as from the collapsing of galaxies, in which a black hole was already present, however. Through a collapsing, the entire mass of the collapsing sun or galaxy is so tremendously strongly pressed together, that is to say, compressed, that a small quantity of only 1 cubic centimeter of matter weighs several tons. And so, this compressed matter, of course, also generates a powerful gravitational field, by which tremendous masses of matter are attracted and drawn into the black hole, that is to say, into the compression body, by what means this slowly but steadily grows and becomes larger. This growing, of course, also means that the gravitational field continues to become stronger and further reaching. In your galaxy, which you call the Milky Way, the gravitational field extends far beyond 100,000 light-years in diameter. From this, it can also be recognized that a galaxy first emerges from an existing black hole. Through its gravitational field, it draws, that is to say, tears, very far-off nebulae, gases, dust particles, suns, and planets, as well as meteors, comets, and asteroids, etc. into its spell, and then everything within many light-years of distance begins to rotate around this black hole, from which a galaxy is ultimately formed, whose entire mass rotates at tremendous speed, in a bar-shaped, spiral-shaped, or any other form, around the center, even around the black hole. During this process, it naturally happens that through the compressed core, that is to say through the black hole, the torn-in matter gradually makes the core more and more powerful, and ultimately it swallows the entire galaxy, which will also happen someday with the Milky Way. Such a process, however, takes hundreds of millions of years and often even billions of years. That is, my friend, what I may explain.
That is more than I expected. But you can tell me what happens later then with a black hole. Somehow it will indeed convert back into something, right?
That is of correctness. Once a critical mass of a black hole is reached, it starts to heat up in a resulting internal atomic fire to such an extent that from this, an enormous solar structure develops, which then separates as an enormous flow of matter and explodes, from which new structures, gases, and nebulae, etc., develop again, which ultimately enter into the gravitational field of a black hole again, from which a new galaxy then develops.
Since we are already at it, as I was able to determine on my great journey with Ptah and Sim Yase, very many stars are seen from the Earth, which actually are not such. That is to say, which are not suns, but rather gigantic nebulous formations and galaxies in the depths of space, located at distances that are to be calculated at many tens of thousands, or even millions and tens of millions of light years from the Earth. Not to mention the alleged stars that cannot be seen from the Earth with the eye or with simple telescopes, etc., since they are located billions of light years away. Many of the so-called naked eye stars that are incredibly far away from the Earth truly are not such. Rather, they are gigantic, radiating nebulous formations or galaxies.
That corresponds to the truth, and in this connection, there can only be talk of those objects that are located at very far distances from the Earth. Because from this, there are very many actual solar objects to be seen, which are located at much closer distances.
My speech also is not of these actual suns, but just of those very distant objects that are only visible from Earth as so-called stars. But in reality, these are very luminous nebulous formations or galaxies, which exhibit enormous dimensions of dozens or even hundreds of light years, and which exist at distances of many light years, which must be counted in the dozens, hundreds, thousands, or even millions.
My words also corresponded to this notion.
Excuse me, then it was a misunderstanding. And while we are already at it, unfortunately, it happens over and over again that misunderstandings arise in connection with the old forms of speech, so also in connection with castration and sterilization, as these two concepts are called in the Talmud Emmanuel. Of course, I strive hard to clarify these misunderstandings in myself in the best possible manner, just in accordance with my knowledge. Over these two concepts and their actual meaning, I was instructed in such a way by Sfath, and also the storage banks freely gave the same information, that the action of castration and sterilization, in the old sense and, thus, also in the sense of the Talmud Emmanuel, did not mean that the fallible ones, who were included in this action, had their gender deformed or removed. Rather, the sterilization and castration quite simply took place through the fact that the possibility of bisexual sexual intercourse was taken from the fallible ones, in that they were separated from the opposite sex and were taken to places of compliance, where in accordance with the gender of the fallible ones, only those of the same sex had to serve their term, that is to say their punishment, as this is simply called today. As Sfath explained, this separation from the presence of the opposite sex corresponded to the so-called castration and sterilization, because through this action, no bisexual relations, and thus no bisexual sexual intercourse could take place anymore, which also prevented that fallible descendants could be produced. This, in turn, ensured that no fallible ones, that is to say criminals, and with these, asocial child elements, could be placed into the world, who would have then enjoyed a bad upbringing by their fallible parents and by their environment, and would have even become fallible ones, criminals, and asocial ones. In addition, now the question as to whether this was also kept and handled in such a way with your ancient peoples, since this law goes back to the age-old laws of Henoch and Enoch, whose most distant descendants are your peoples. And what about today? If this law applied to you in earlier times, does it still also apply today?
What you have just explained also corresponds to the truth. And in fact, it is also the case that all our ancient peoples handled the law addressed by you to its full extent. The law still invariably applies today, but it already has not been put to use for several millenniums due to the fact that there are no more fallible ones, criminals, and asocial elements among us.
Svath already enlightened me as a small boy about the fact that new religious sects will continuously arise and run rampant, starting from the 50s, even so-called UFO sectarianism, parapsychology sectarianism, and esoteric sectarianism, which has also proven itself to be true since that time, like also many other things that he predicted to me for the future. His words were that as a result of this, very bad things and events would occur, which has also, unfortunately, proven itself to be true. Against this sectarianism, so I think something should be done, which I would do with great pleasure. Unfortunately, I see no great chances therein if I would strive for this, but this still will not keep me from raising my voice against it, which certainly will not make me more popular, however. So far, I've only had bad experiences. The question is whether there is still any sense to it. What do you think?
Your actions relating to this are well known to us. Thus, we also know that you are badly attacked from a more religious as well as from a purely sectarian side, which is certain to bring you unpleasantness in time and even legal actions against you, because sectarians, who are attacked with the truth, usually defend themselves vehemently in order to downplay and to deny their wrongdoings. Sectarians are liars, swindlers, and cheats, who are only out to rally believers and enslaved ones around themselves, in order to exploit these and to be able to position themselves in the light and in the forefront, as self-appointed eminences and divinities of their own graces, or as representatives of a god or any allegedly high and lofty, as well as all-knowing and powerful extraterrestrial, etc. But we have already talked about this.
Right. But that does not answer my question as to whether I should continue in my actions against sectarianism.
We must leave this to your decision and responsibility, even though we think that your actions relating to this are right and desirable for the dissemination of the truth.
That is a clear answer. With this, I also know that I am really going to incur legal action and more religious and sectarian enemies. Then so be it. And then, I can also immediately lash out on the timpani with what I say now, which will then also be written down as a contact conversation and be spread throughout the world. So then, religions and sects sow hatred and separation of the people among themselves, and they drive their believers, enslaved ones, and fanatics into harming, abusing, fighting, and eradicating those of other beliefs. Since ancient times, religions and sects do not create peace, freedom, harmony, and love, but rather animosity, anger, quarrel, and rage, as well as blind fury, racial hatred, hatred against other faiths, bondage, dependence, servitude, slavery, war and strife, distress, misery, sorrow, anxiety and fear, delusional faith, superiority over other people, autonomy, and many other serious evils through which murder and mayhem prevail among the earth humans. Through the insanity of the religions and sects, it has been determined since time immemorial as to what lives are worth living. Namely, only those who belongs to one's own religion or sect, while everything else is heathenistic, damnable, and worthy of eradication. Through their dogmas, delusional beliefs, and fanaticism, the religions and sects determine the insanity and the inhumanity of making war upon and exploiting those of other faiths. It is even determined as to who owns the goods, the property, and the country, and as to what nations and what states have a right to live or not. Religions and sects determine the existence or non-existence of people, nations, and states. And religions and sects are the most powerful and most dangerous means of might and Gewalt, as well as of the wars, the capital, the exploitation, and the deception of the people. In the foreground, they preach love and peace, but in the background, They create, demand, and promote murder and mayhem, robbery and terrorism against those of other faiths, in order to bring their own religion or sect to power. No matter how much human blood flows and is shed, and no matter how much pain, sorrow, grief, distress, and misery, as well as hatred and terrorism develop again from this. However, almost no person wants to hear or know these truths, because the real truth is not in demand, but only lies and deceit, swindling and fraud, as well as deception. These worthless ones are the ones to whom people give their attention and their faith. Thus, it happens that every prophet or every prophetess of the truth is banished to the desert, where they can no longer be heard. And in fact, it is also the case that those who announce the effective truth become designated as sectarians by their critics and enemies, and become attacked, slandered, and denigrated. And this, even though between a sectarian or sect and a prophet or prophetess, there is such a huge difference in the effective truth, which should actually be recognized by a rational person. But obviously the critics and enemies are devoid of any reason in this regard. They only practice criticism and slander, in order to assert themselves for the sake of material rewards, for they are hostile to the truth, or the truth simply does not penetrate into the brains of the critics or slanderers, due to their own arrogance. One reason for this may be that their reason and intellect are not strong enough, so the real truth cannot be recognized. But there are still many other reasons for this, and enumerating them all would probably fill books.
Those are words that are not to be denied.
There is still much more to say, namely that by and large, the Earth humans are not actually interested in the effective truth, but only in unreal things and lies of religions, sects, swindlers, liars and cheats who lie their heads off, hypocritically preaching doctrines of salvation and plans of salvation, and giving just as deceitful promises of salvation, which can never be fulfilled. And the Earth humans fall for this because to them, in their falsehood and in their ignorance, in which they eke out their existence and search for a better life and for the real truth, there is a real need for salvation. And the rule is that through the deception of the religions and sects, the people rely on the false story of divine salvation and on the divine plan of salvation. Through this, with unintentional gewalt, they push every responsibility far away from themselves, relying on the message of salvation and, therewith, on the redemption, which will never become a reality, by God or by his hosts of angels, by Jesus Christ, by saints, or even by those who are deceased, who should bring help from the beyond, or by extraterrestrials, as this has been preached and has been maintained for quite some time by irresponsible and exploitative UFO sect gurus, who will support themselves as such in the future, as Svath explained, through which all of the chiefs of the sects become very rich, for they financially exploit their followers and believers, as well as those who are enslaved to them and other fools, and through this they live in joy and glory. The Earth humans do not run to the truth, but to lies and deception, to religions and sects, and they believe everything that they are led to believe and everything that is given to them by the sect bosses and religious bigwigs. With this, I in no wise want to attack those religionists, that is to say those parishioners, priests, monks, devotees, and other religious representatives who are devoted to their faith in honesty and who maintain love, peace, freedom, harmony, humanity, and true brotherly love, etc. in the best form. In fact, I know many such human beings, and their lifestyle leaves nothing to be desired in the aforementioned forms. Therefore, I give them all necessary respect and due reverence, even though they are connected to a religious faith. But those whom I attack are all those who cannot be added to these worthy people, because they are among the severe or most severe fallible ones, who, in their Ausertung, to get very badly out of control of the good human nature, give no honor to the designation of human being, having parasite-like, mendacious, swindler-like, and deceitful thoughts, feelings, emotions, and manners of acting, and through these, they deeply and disgustingly alienate and dissociate themselves from the designation of honorable human being.
Unfortunately, everything is actually so, as you say. And it will still take a very long time before the Earth humans reflect and begin to look for their salvation no longer in the religions and sects, but rather in the reality, in that they turn their ears and their minds to the actuality and truth. Many centuries and even millenniums will still pass before the seeds of the truth, which you painstakingly sow, will rise up, germinate, and thrive, for which you will, as a rule, only reap ingratitude, bad words, and criticism, as well as slander and attacks on your life, as this has, so far, already been the case several times. Nevertheless, you must still do your work, because the spreading of the seed is of urgent necessity. First, there will only be few who will cultivate the seeds that are sown and who will allow fruits to thrive from this, but these will gradually multiply themselves and spread all over the world. Everything will be very laborious. However, because the truth is not wanted to be heard or recognized. Rather, only a message of salvation and an alleged salvation-bringing of a religious and sectarian form are demanded to be heard and are expected, as you have expressed this clearly. Very many Earth humans think and hope in this wise, because they are not acquainted with the truth and are not taught this. Rather, they are deceived and cheated by the false religions and false representatives and by the sectarians and their followers, namely through erroneous teachings, false evoking of hope, and through unrealizable, dishonest, and unreal promises. Through the pretense of false facts, the human beings are made into believers, enslaved ones, and fanatics who, without hesitation and without any scruple, do not even shy away from murder, in the name and belief of their religion or sect, as well as in accordance with the instructions of the religious leaders and sect leaders, and from brutally massacring their fellow humans, in order still to desecrate them and rob them later. You correctly cite with your words that there are, of course, also respectable, proper, and dignified human beings among the religionists, but unfortunately, these correspond to a very small minority.
That is right, and thus it must simply be said clearly and plainly. But now we should have talked enough about this. There are still some other questions that I would like to ask if your time still allows you to answer these for me.
Just ask.
Good, thank you. As you also know, the custom prevails among the Earth humans, at least among many, that deodorants are used against perspiration. But to my knowledge, there is the risk of the elimination of immunity against bacteria and fungus, etc. At least, that is what I can remember, which Svath explained to me. He also taught me that through the reduction of perspiration, wrong smells arise, whereby the partners of the opposite sex, both the female as well as the male, become misled, for the male partner or the female partner cannot be in his or her right scent, that is to say, right smell, scented, or smelled. This means that through the use of sweat-absorbing means, even deodorants and so on, and through an artificial smell, that is to say scent, what can no longer be perceived of the relevant person's own scent becomes distorted and obscured. Then, if the artificial means against the development of sweat are no longer applied, then the natural scent penetrates through again, which does not appeal to the male partner or to the female partner, which can then lead to conflict and to the breakup of the relationship and connection, and indeed, this also happens in many cases. Moreover, the scent of the sweat of females and males is also decisive for sexual stimulation, which naturally becomes disturbed and falsified by the use of antiperspirants. Thus, a male partner and a female partner can have thriving sexual relations and joys as long as deodorants and other antiperspirants are applied. But if a discontinuance of the same occurs, then aversion or even disgust mutually arises among both human beings. But that is not enough, for as I already said, the immune system is also impaired by the use of antiperspirants, etc., in the form that fungus and eczema develop, and bacteria begins a health-destructive work and can carry this out. The question now is whether you can tell me something more about this.
By and large, you said what is necessary, but I can still explain the following. The sweat of the human is a very necessary product of the body, through which this is protected against infections. There is a very specific substance that is contained in the sweat, which I may not mention officially. However, due to our directives, for this would be a serious intervention in the earthly medical development, and this protects the skin from bacteria being able to settle and form on it, along with eczema, fungus, inflammations, and infections. This defense substance produced by the body's sweat practically forms the body's own antimicrobial antibiotics, which have huge effects and even prevent inflammations and skin infections, etc. Sweat develops. Therefore, a very strong protection of an antibiotic nature which, however, is just as much destroyed by deodorants and other antiperspirants, as you call them, as by too frequent washing. Just for this reason alone, a simple body wash should be carried out each day, and only with clear water, without the use of chemical cleaning agents. Such should only find application if work operations or other very dirty operations require it. Under normal conditions, so with activity that does not accumulate a lot of dirt. Neither a shower nor a bath should be taken every day, for such destroys the antimicrobial protection of the sweat, through which health damage can appear. Frequent colds and attacks of the flu, as well as many other symptoms, often trace back to the fact that too much showering or bathing took place, and, in addition, that chemical hair cleaners and body cleaners were used. If very dirty work is not required, then at most, one full bath or one full body shower each week should be sufficient for the maintenance of hygiene and health.
Unfortunately, with the irrationality and erroneous views of the Earth humans, that will be met with deaf ears and with a horrendous desire to know better.
That will probably be the case. Unfortunately, the fact of the need for sweat education, in the form discussed by us, is not yet known by terrestrial medical science. For up to now, only inadequate assumptions exist, which are geared toward the notion that the calcium content of the sweat forms some protection for the body. In accordance with the current research of the terrestrial scientists, it should still take at least another 15 to 20 years before they find out the truth through their efforts.
That is bitter medicine, my son. But what it is, one cannot change it anyways. But now, my friend, it has already become early morning, so I should still get some sleep, for my day will be strict and long again. You also know that Saturday is a workday for me, as it also is for you. I will keep the other questions for our next meeting, and will ask them then.
You also actually look quite exhausted. So I will go then. Goodbye.
Goodbye.